You're listening to Travel Tales with Fergal.
Hello, my name is Fergal O'Keefe and you're very welcome to the podcast. The longest walk I ever did was also my favourite. I spent 20 wonderful days trekking from village to village through incredible snow-capped mountains in the Annapurna range in the Nepalese Himalayas in the year 2000. I walked the world-famous Annapurna Circuit trail, which takes you through mist-covered valleys, remote villages and secret monasteries. The route brought us over freshly snow-covered pass over 5,500 metres, which tested my resilience to altitude sickness and stamina at the time. But the harder the challenge, the greater the sense of accomplishment, they say. That experience of the Nepalese Himalayas has given me a deep appreciation of the country, its people, especially the Sherpas, and the climbers who attempt the greatest mountain of them all, Everest. Since then, I've always been fascinated with stories of people attempting Everest, often deadly stories, from books like Into Thin Air, Touching the Void, also films like Sherpas and the recent 14 Peaks. So I was riveted last May when I started to follow the literal ups and downs of my guest today as he attempted to climb Everest during the peak of the pandemic. Damian Browne hails from Galway and is a former professional rugby player who's played for Leinster, Northampton, Brive and Oyonnax. Damian's passion for travel and adventure has led him to visit over 50 countries and 6 continents. Damian is an adventurer in the truest sense of the word, using the world's most extreme environments to test his physical and mental capabilities. Damian has covered more ground than many of the great explorers in the early 20th century, including spending 63 days rowing solo across the Atlantic, an epic trip he previously spoke to me about on our very first podcast back in 2020. Since Damian climbed Elbrus, the highest mountain in Europe and Russia in 2018, he's been obsessed with successfully climbing Everest and completing the 7 summits. His original trip was called off in 2020 when the pandemic hit and he had to put that on hold. Last year, a window opened up for him to go to Nepal in April, just a few days after his Australian partner gave birth to their first child in Brisbane. Epic is a word that's often used when talking about adventures, but this attempt on Everest was truly epic, and I look forward to sharing Damian's tale with you now, where he talks about the climb, working with Sherpas, and what it's like to be on that iconic mountain from base camp to Camp 2 to Camp 3 for so long, and so much more. Great to see you. You're looking great. Looking fit as a fiddle.
Yeah, good to see you too. Well, yeah, flat out, I suppose, right in the meat of training now for Project Empower. So, yeah, it's tough, it's relentless, and it's demanding. So, I suppose it's taking some effects, not only visually, you know.
I know, I can imagine. So the last time I was talking to you, you were actually the first guest on this podcast. And the last thing you said to me on the talk, we were talking about Everest, that you were kind of saying you weren't big into mountains and heights, but you did have a target, because I think it was 2018 you did Mount Elbrus. So you were doing the 7 Summits Challenge, and Everest was the next one on it. And the plan, you had planned to do it in May 2020. And of course, the world was locked down. Then you were planning, hoping for 2021. And I sent you a message, I think it was like 26th of March. And you said you didn't know. You didn't know if it was going to happen or not.
No.
And then on the, I think it was the 4th, around the 4th of April, your baby, Elodie, was born.
That's right.
And then I got a message off you on the 8th saying you're on your way to Kathmandu.
I know, a whirlwind to say the least. Yeah, it was a very conflicting time for me, you know. I had these 2 huge life events, and you know, one of them was clearly much bigger than the other, but Everest was still important to me and had a lot of meaning to me, and I put 3 years of my life into kind of making it happen, you know, and building up to it. 2 training periods, and then the 2 of them were clashing. And you know, of course, the birth of Elodie and care of Roselle at the time, my partner, took, you know, precedence and priority. And the way we left it in the run up was that when the birth happened, and see how everybody, comes out the other side of that, for want of a better expression. Then we'd make a call on Everest. So Elodie was due originally, her due date was the 23rd of March, if I remember, and she came 12 days later, which is typical, right? I suppose, like, I'm just human, like, you can't help but think about this other thing, and at the time I remember feeling really guilty about that, but then having conversations with Roselle around it, there's a reason you think about it, is because, like, you have to focus on those things because they're so dangerous, really, and if you're unfocused going into them, you just increase the percentage of something shitty happening, and that's the last thing I want. So even though the birth of my first child was fast approaching, I also was thinking a lot about, or not a lot, but a little bit about Everest, I suppose. And, I just couldn't help it. It was just kind of innate. And and then, like I said, the birth didn't come until the 4th of April. And then, like, it was meant to, by a standard schedule, or by the team I was going with, their schedule, I should be in Kathmandu at that point, and another factor you have to kind of take into account here is that, like, I'm a big mountaineer, right? I'm like 120 kilos, walking around the street weight. So when I'm preparing for a mountain, I strip that down a lot, but I'm still far larger than, like, anybody else trying to get up the mountain. Your kind of world-class mountaineer is 72 kilos wet through. There's a reason behind that, because it's easier to climb a mountain if you're 72 kilos rather than 100. A big thing for me then is spending more time at altitude and giving myself a largest window as possible to acclimatize and get my body used to the lack of oxygen, and get my cells, the more mass you have, the more oxygen you need. So to get that mass used to functioning well and efficiently at altitude, so now I'm thinking, so I'm behind here, right? And it turns out I didn't, I gave it a few days, or we gave it a few days, I suppose. And, we kind of had the conversation around, said, I think it was, you're bang on with the dates. I think it was around the 7th of April. And then the next day I was literally packing and trying to get negative COVID tests, and trying to get flights, and trying to organize nutrition, because just, again, I never really feel I'm particularly nourished in terms of nutrients at high altitude, so I try and supplement that with my own stuff. So it was just like whirlwind 24 hours. I was trying to get last minute gear, running around, booking flights. People were like, my mother-in-law basically was trying to make me protein bars I'd given her a recipe for. This was the extent of that day. And then I was on the way to Brisbane Airport the next day, still waiting for my results of my I think at that stage it was an antigen test, I can't really remember, that I needed to get out of the country, and I just remember sitting on my bags piled on a trolley in the airport, looking at the attendant at the gate who was waiting for my email to come through. And it was like an hour and 15 minutes before the flight took off, and eventually pinged into my inbox, and then I could show her that, get on the flight. And then finally I felt, Jesus, I'm going to get a shot at Everest this year.
But it must be nerve-wracking then when you were flying into Kathmandu. I mean, there wasn't much flying going on around the world, and so not only did you have Everest, but you also had the worry about lockdowns and COVID.
It was, and my big worry was just, I'm behind here. Like, my team is somewhere 3 or 4 days now, no, 5 days at that point, into an Everest base camp trek. I'm always thinking of, like, the threats, the threats that are going to stop me succeeding here, and that was a big one, right? So I'm like a bit anxious about that, and kind of just want to get going and catch them, or like at least get into rarefied air and start to kind of get my body into a place, because there's a reason people take 8 weeks, to climb Everest. Like, it's not by chance. Like, there's not a strategy that doesn't. It's a strategy that works, So anytime that is lessened, it lessens your chances. That was really my big concern at that point, and just couldn't really think of anything else around that. And I was just happy to get going, and and you know, there's always a question mark around how you're going to acclimatize. Like, so people, I've heard stories of people who've talked about, you know, have been good acclimatizers, and then all of a sudden they go to one mountain and for some reason they don't acclimatize well at all, and it's a bit of a nightmare. So that's always in the back of your mind going, fuck, I hope this isn't the one, like, you know, because I had, in fairness to me and my body and my nervous system, it had progressively, there was a clear picture of it getting better at altitude every time I went to altitude. But still, there's that, you know, in the back of your mind thinking, you know, I've heard stories about it going the other way all of a sudden, so that could happen. And, you know, this is the biggest mountain you've ever tried, and it's the biggest challenge you've ever, in terms of mountaineering, you've ever taken on. So, and, you know, you're not exactly a mountaineer. So this is all the internal narrative. So there's a bit of kind of, anxiousness and a bit of apprehension around that.
When you flew into Kathmandu, were you able to appreciate the place, or were you just worried about getting going?
No, not at all. Like, it was straight from the airport to the hotel. Quick kind of intro to the guy on the ground there, the fixer with the company, Tag Nepal. Food that evening, up to bed, really like a last minute kind of look at gear. And then the next morning we were on a flight out of there to Lukla, the famous kind of world's most dangerous airport, I think it's often known as, on the side of a mountain in the Himalayas. Isn't it stunning? But yeah, it was just this kind of expedited entry and exit out of Kathmandu. Little did I know I'd be back there pretty soon.
And when you arrived at Lukla, you described it, I'd never heard it before, of it's like having cliff faces on either side of the windows, on both sides when you're flying in.
I was sitting in it's kind of like a taxi service between Kathmandu. The planes, like, between Kathmandu and Lukla, and they're just like this rolling kind of conveyor belt of these tiny little, like, I don't know what type of plane it was, but basically there's a 2 seats and 1 seat. It reminds me of the old Air Aran flights out of Galway Airport years ago. And I was in that kind of middle seat, if you want, the one away from the window of the two. So I was kind of a little bit in the middle of the plane, and he wasn't getting the greatest views. But as we were kind of coming in, you know, you're quite like, you know, you have knowledge that it's Lukla and you've seen YouTube videos, and you kind of want to get a glimpse of it. And I remember looking out to my right, and like, just, I don't know how close it was now, but it was particularly close, just seeing this kind of like fern laden kind of, like a cliffside, and then looking the other side immediately on a swivel, and it's very similar distance. You're like, fuck, it's not every day you see that on a plane, like, you know.
And so when you went to Lukla, then, I mean, normally, say, from there to base camp, isn't that about, usually it's like 12 days, isn't it? A walk like that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's
so
right.
You were probably rushing, were you?
A little bit, yeah. So I had a Sherpa come back from, he had been trekking with the main group, and he came all the way back to Lukla, and then it was just me and him over the next 7 days or so. And we did that kind of 7 days in what would take, I think, 10 or 11 days normally. So we never spent more than one night anywhere. Whereas the team I joined, like, when they had done that trek a little bit ahead of me, they would have spent 2 nights in 3 places. Whereas I never spent more than one night, you know. So it was yeah, like you said, it was expedited that way. And the reason was to kind of catch me up with the main group. But that in itself brought challenges for me, you know. Again, just coming back to the whole reality of being a bigger mountaineer and needing more time. And then, you know, it's not a smart move to rush, to move fast at altitude. There's a reason every high altitude mountain you ever go on, everyone is telling you to go slower. And then when you think you're going slow, they tell you to go slower again, you know. So that rush piece is not a smart move, and it kind of caught up with me. Ended up catching the group at a place called Loboche Peak, and that was a mountain that people use on the way to Everest Base Camp to do an acclimatization summit, and it's about 6,000 odd meters, so it's, you know, it's no joke. And they had come down after being kind of snowed out of that. They didn't get to the peak, but they were now, like, whatever that was. How many days were they? They were 4, 5, 6 days ahead of me, I think. And then the next day, they all packed up shop, and it was kind of decided that I should go with them because I'd finally reached them, and there's no point splitting us again. So that meant we were going to Everest Base Camp the next day. So that day was a tough day for me. Now I felt very low on energy, and was just struggling with the altitude and struggling with the speed, I suppose, of the ascent.
Yeah, I mean, it must have been very hard. I mean, I think I saw you saying about the big thing over the walk was a fear of failure. So that start really didn't help that, did it? Because you were rushing.
No, exactly. I first hit me in what's it called, Namche Bazaar, which is kind of the kind of main town of those mountain communities. The main kind of where everyone else comes to gather supplies, and there, that was only day 3 or something, and I got a headache. I couldn't believe it, and I felt a bit sick, and I'm like, fuck, you're only at 3,000 meters. Like, this isn't the time for this to be happening. And then it got me that day going to Everest Base Camp. That was a long day for me. And yeah, you're a bit shook, because that is conforming with the narrative you have in your head about, this is too fast for you. You're too big to be going at this speed. So it was a little bit rocked already, that was it, getting into Everest Base Camp. And then, it only got worse from there.
Because, when you're doing that, I mean, it's the mental side as much as the physical, isn't it?
Yeah, it's controlling that piece, and looking after yourself, because that mental or that negative narrative, that negative chatter takes energy, and energy is a premium up there, so you need to be really careful in how you're expending it, even in your thoughts, so yeah, worrying about that sort of stuff wasn't helping things. Like, it kind of comes personally anyway, just because of the threats. Again, I've been a bigger mountaineer, and what I've gone through in the past, it kind of comes with that kind of territory, if you want. I need to be like a hawk, watching what my body's doing, witnessing how it's feeling, and the earlier I can recognize any of those threats, I can then do something about it, because that will kind of mitigate what happens further along. So there's an element of reason behind it, but what it does do, of course, if you are a little bit like unstable, and now I can start to add in the emotional challenge, which was totally unexpected, which started to kind of ramp up around this time, and that challenge was having left my partner and my newborn basically to come here, and it was just something I just did not expect, never saw coming. If you told me beforehand, this is going to be an issue for you, I would have probably dismissed it, saying I'd be grand, but I wasn't, so that added in, it just, it created this kind of melange of mental challenge, which, I really honestly never got control of until I started to get stronger physically. But we're going right to the end now, which was about a week before I left Everest Base Camp.
And when you arrived in base camp, did you get a lift there? Was that, because that is kind of one first target, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's pretty cool seeing the kind of iconic rock as you walk in, but that's short-lived. Like, it's a very instant pang, okay. and then you're like, where's my tent? I want to lie down. I'm absolutely fucked here. Because I was at that point. I just struggled that whole day, and that's the end of the day, right?
Was it different this year? Was it as busy as it has been over the last few years, or was it a lot quieter? Or was it
no, it was a record season, believe it or not. They had a record amount of permits sold. I think that was a bit of a shock to everyone. And then as the numbers started to climb, a lot of people were talking about it, and it went from like 160 permits, I think, when I first confirmed, and I was late. Now I remember that. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden it was close to 400 about a week and a half, 2 weeks later. So there was this burst, I suppose, of, for whatever reason, I think.
Pent up demand, I suppose.
Demand, and I think the lack of regulation or care really for the Nepalese government. As far as I can see, they just see the dollar signs, and it's big money. You're talking it's $25,000, I think, for an Everest, 20 to 25 anyway for a summit, So they're not going turning that away in the middle of a pandemic after not getting a season the year before, So I think they were just kind of anyone and anyone was kind of getting a permit and getting let in.
What were the facilities like? Like I saw yours, like it looked pretty cool. Wasn't there? There was kind of a sitting room area and stuff, wasn't there?
Oh yeah, no, it's now climbing the seven summits would be known, I think, as one of the more like they offer a bit of a more luxe package than most. Like, so there was like, for example, in our camp there was 3 levels of tents, and we had I think some of the people had it classed. There was the plebs, who were us, who were all down in the basic tents, and then there was the executive suites, and then there was the first class lounges. And you should have seen these things. They were like a little house, like, they had an entry hall and a bed up on legs, and it was pretty plush, like, but people have to pay for that as well. Even the tents we were in, those plebs down in the ghetto, we had they had like a big kind of, it must have been a 6 or 7 inch mattress like in the tent, which is unusual. Obviously, normally you have an air mattress and then you have your sleeping bag on top of that. So we had that, and I was sleeping great up there. Well, generally, like, but you don't have to worry about the cold, at least through that mattress, taking the heat out of you during the night. So yeah, I was very happy where I was at.
Although you described some mornings finding it so hard to unzip the sleeping bag, and I could relate to that, and I'm at ground level here in a valley in Tipperary.
yeah there's this period in the morning, if you wake up, that the sun hasn't come over the mountains yet to the west, so the camp is fucking frigid, like Baltic, right? And but if you wake up 20 minutes after the sun has started to hit the tents, it's fucking like a sauna in there. Well, not like a sauna, but it's so much warmer, it's like a 20-degree swing, like. So if you do wake up that side of the no sun yet on tents, you're not exactly kind of in a rush to open up your sleeping bag, your lovely -40 down sleeping bag that you're as snug as a bug in, and get out into it.
For people that don't know, then, so you're in your base camp, and the idea, I think you call them rotations. So you go up and down the mountain to climatize. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. So normally the strategy for acclimatizing and giving yourself the best opportunity to summit Everest is, so you kind of get there around kind of mid-April, right, into base camp, and then over that period you'll do 2 rotations. So that means that on the first rotation you get to a certain point up the mountain, probably camp 2, and spend a couple of nights there, and then come back down and then take some rest, give your body a chance to adapt to the altitude you've introduced it to. And then after that period of rest, you go on another rotation, but this time you go higher, probably to camp 3, and you might even get to camp 3 and go a little bit above it. The higher you can get, the better. And then you'll come all the way back down to base camp again and do a long rest. And then you're kind of ready to push for the summit whenever you get a window, which is normally around anytime after May 12th, 13th. So some companies, and it's been achieved by just doing one summit rotation as well, so just doing one of those rotations, but they do try and get as close to camp 3 on that one rotation. So yeah, that's the strategy. And the group I was with, it kind of got, just because it was a big mess this year with COVID, it kind of got split into some people went on 2 rotations, some only went on 1, and I ended up just doing 1 myself, just because I went to I had a little break down to Kathmandu because I got COVID, and then when I got back, I went on 1 rotation, and yeah, that's the way it's done.
So we were talking about getting the COVID there. So you were really, like, when you were doing that rotation and you were in base camp, you were really suffering, weren't you? And you didn't know at the time. Because I was following you, and you were really frustrated with yourself because you felt like your power and your altitude, you were really suffering, weren't you?
Yeah, so I was just putting it down to the altitude, right? And there was an element of altitude in my lack of power, lack of endurance. But little did I know in that, like, we went on one acclimatization hike in particular, and I was trailed way out the back of the group, and at one point got my O2 sats measured by our lead Sherpa, a guy called Big Tendi, and he's like, he didn't even he just looked at me and said, "You're going back." So the O2 sats is your blood oxygen saturation level. So we're walking around at sea level, or roughly sea level, and it'll be like 99, 100. But when you get up into kind of 5,000-6,000 meters, so Everest base camp is 5,340 meters, you should be in the low 90s, and maybe some people will be in the high 80s. And when you're out hiking, it'll drop a little bit as well, or hiking, trekking on those acclimatizations. He eventually told me I was at 50 at that point, which is, very low. So I got sent back that time, and there was a lot of frustration. And then we were had a few more days at base camp, and I think we might have tried another acclimatization hike. I think I felt a bit better. Then the next day I was absolutely wrecked. I think we did some stuff in the ice fall, some technical skills, and then I came back from that, and I got tested. So some of the group had already tested positive for COVID. And then I was like, I'm not feeling well. So they were like, well, we're going to test you anyway. Tested me, showed up positive, got isolated straight away. And then turns out 4 more of my team also tested positive at the same kind of period. And then the next day we all got choppered out of base camp back to Kathmandu, and then isolated in a hotel there for like.
Did you think it was over? Did you think it was over at that stage? Or
well, I thought, like, my whole attitude around this from the start, really, and when things started to get difficult, was like, just stay in the fight, because you just never know what's going to happen, right? But you can't help, like, my confidence took massive hit. I wasn't exactly confident, but at the same time, there was no summit going to be had there and then, so it's just like, just hang in, just keep fighting, just hang in, see what happens. And, I kind of gave myself this, like, there's an opportunity here, like, at the same time, like, because you could technically summit Everest after getting COVID, like, which is a hell of a story, So I was like, just stay in there, just stay in the fight. So, but you can't help but think, like, this is going to get harder and harder. It's just comes back to that whole piece around, you need a certain block of time at altitude to get to 8,848 meters in the air, like, to get to the top of the world. It's not, again, not by chance that they do this 8-week expedition, to give yourself the best chance. Firstly, I was behind. Secondly, I never really got acclimatized when I got to base camp. And now I'm back in Kathmandu for, like, what turns out to be about 10 days in total. So, like, you're getting back to, I think roughly the dates were around the 1st of May by the time I was getting back to base camp. And now I'm thinking, so I got to go through I got to acclimatize. I got to see how I pull up after this fucking COVID thing. And then I got to try and get to the top of the world. And I'm like 100 kilos. So,
and the time is running out as well,
Yeah, now you're down to 4 weeks, like, at best, at absolute best, 4 weeks to be off the mountain. So, you're not exactly thinking, the odds are in my favor here. But I never kind of gave up on it. I just kept telling myself, stay in the fight and see what happens,
It showed your resilience, though. I mean, that was what really came out. They really kept going. You never give up. You were keep going. So when you went back up, you mentioned there the Khumbu ice fall, and that was something that really came across as people often talk about how scary it is, but you loved it, didn't you? You described
Oh,
how beautiful it is.
it's unbelievably stunning place. Like, I mean, it's just this otherworldly place of shapes and colors and sizes of like ice sculptures, if you want, like I just thought it was like, I just thought, man, I'm a lucky person to see this. Like, I'm literally like, normally when you're on a mountain and you see something like that, it's a void. Like, nobody goes near it. Like, right, that is danger. And on
True.
Everest, they fucking walk through it for like 7 or 8 hours. So I was like, like there is an element of me, but and I mean this sincerely, like we're very privileged to go through this and to experience it and just look at it. Like it's just bizarre and beautiful and like otherworldly. And yeah, so I did enjoy it. I do like the more extreme things in life, and that's a very extreme experience to go through. But at one stage, I tell you, we were walking through at one point, can't remember exactly when, and it's moving, and it's making noises, and then there was this fucking noise to my left. It was only about, I'd say, 100 meters away. It was like a shotgun, and you just go into this like kind of almost like mini state of like shock, or that you don't move for a second, like because there's bits of ice breaking off, like, and that's what it was. About 100 meters to my left, like a fucking crack of ice, and then it just tumbled down, so you've got that stuff going on as well. It brings you back to reality very, very quickly.
It also makes you appreciate, I would say, the Sherpas. We haven't mentioned them, but the guys that go and they put on the bridges and the ropes.
Mm.
I mean, and obviously you're with them every day. I mean, they're amazing people, aren't they?
Oh, they're incredible! Like, they're rock stars of the Himalayas. So there's a team there called the Ice Fall Doctors. So they're the people who take care of that Khumbu ice fall and the route through it. They set the route and they take down the route and they care for the route throughout the season. So they spend a lot of time in the Khumbu, and then you have all the porters and the Sherpa from each team that have to bring the supplies to Camp 1 and Camp 2. So they're going through that, 4 times as much as any climber is, in terms of a client of one of the operators. So we had a guy early in the season, before anyone was actually going through it in terms of climbers, who fell and broke his, I can't remember, was it his arm or his leg? And apparently he swung against an ice wall, and only he was wearing his helmet. The helmet cracked, but he was okay. So it just shows you, this is the dangers of the place, and these are the guys risking most. They've a much higher percentage of things going wrong because they spend much more time in there than the rest of us.
I did the Annapurna Circuit, and they're amazing people, aren't they? The Nepalese, they're very spiritual. Yeah. They're lovely people.
Spiritual, very soft. Just very kind of considerate and lovely people. The Sherpa themselves are just kind of very close knit community, and although they are like so kind of advanced and so far ahead in terms of their climbing skills, and they're just so there's not a kind of note of superiority in them, exactly, when it comes to like guiding you through it and helping you, and you never get that from them. They're just like, they're very willing to kind of make you feel like you're not an idiot, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And they're very modest. Actually, that movie, 14 Peaks, Nim's Day, I think they were all Nepalese. It was great to see that. Was he on the mountain when you were there, Nim's Day?
He was there, yeah. He was there with his company, Elite X Speed, I think they're called. We came across him and his group a couple of times when we were on acclimatization hikes and going through the icefall. I remember one day. This is a guy who's doing an incredible amount for that community, like in terms of, giving them the recognition they deserve in the mountaineering world, because these guys are just different level, like it's phenomenal. And now they're leading the way, and they're getting the kudos, and they're getting the well, in some cases anyway, they're getting the rewards, you know, in terms of
Exactly.
the finances, which would have gone elsewhere or has gone elsewhere before.
And so when you went back, you had a real lift. Your energy levels went up to the level where you were doing sprints up and down the mountain, or up, weren't you?
Eventually, eventually, it was a long journey to get to there. So I came down off my, so I did my summer rotation after I came back. Or sorry, I did my rotation after I came back. And that was long. And I had good days and I had bad days. I felt levels of fatigue during that rotation, particularly coming out of the Kumbu, getting to Camp 1. There was these like 3 or 4 deep crevices that you had to go down into and climb up the other end, nearly vertical faces. And I remember coming out a few of those climbs, man, and I had to sit down for literally about 25 minutes to just get some sort of semblance of energy back. And then we'd trek on again. And then you'd see another one of these deep crevices and the ladders and the ropes down and up the other side, and your heart would fucking drop because I literally hadn't an ounce of fucking energy. And then the second time was particularly brutal. So I had a good day between Camp 1 and Camp 2, though. I was like, oh, this is good. This is feeling really good today. Feeling strong, not feeling that fatigued. Now it's an easier trek, but still, it's higher. And you know, you're getting between 6.1 and 6.5 at this stage. So you're getting into serious kind of altitude, you know. And then I had a couple of days at Camp 2, and then we were going from Camp 2 to Camp 3, or at least going as high as we could kind of get on that kind of last hike or last bit before we were going to get back down, and that would be the end of our rotation. And that day I'd had a rest, like a full 24 hours rest the day before, and as far as I was concerned, I did everything right, you know, nutrition, hydration, rest. I napped during the day. I couldn't do anything more as far as I could see, and literally the first 30, 40, 50 steps out of base camp, or out of Camp 2 going to Camp 3, I felt I've got nothing here today. And sure enough, the next, whatever it was, 4 or 5 hours, were just a real struggle. We didn't even get to, so there's between Camp 2 and Camp 3, there's the Lhotse face, and there's a thing called the Bershund at the bottom of that. So it's kind of a treacherous enough navigation of this feature, which a big overhang, you know, that you kind of have to get under, and then up the Lhotse face. We didn't even get that far. We sat down, I'd say about 150 meters below that at one point, and we took a big rest, me and my Sherpa at that stage. And then he was like, all right, let's go. And I was like, okay, let's go. And just, you know, as in like, let's keep going. And he was like, no, we go back. And I was like, no, what? And he was like, no, we go back. And to be honest, I just didn't have it in me to fight him. I was like, all right, we go back. So we went back, and then that was when I felt this is over. Like, I really, like that night, that was the lowest in the expedition. I was in a real bad place because I was like, if I can't even get the fucking whatever it was, 7,000 meters, can't even get to the Lhotse face, how am I going to get to 8 Like, you know, I just felt like I've got it. There's something, I still feeling the effects of COVID here. Like, there's something, like, I feel like I'm at about 30% capacity, like, of what I should be at, you know. So I slept on that anyway that night, and then the next day we went all the way back down to base camp. And then I was like, I just gotta find a way here. I gotta resource whatever I can find to give myself an opportunity to go for that summit. And talk to Mike Hamill, who's the head of climbing the 7 summits, and he gave me some advice around what I should be doing in terms of the medication, but also kind of rest and recuperation. That was all good. And then these windows of opportunity popped up to go, but I still wasn't feeling great, and I knew well that, like, if I go now, I won't. I just know it's too early for me. I won't get the summit. So I let that window go, and I waited with the team. There was one full team. So climbing the 7 summits split their kind of groups into 3 teams. And there was one team that were waiting for this late weather window, which is apparently historically comes, and I was like attached to them then because everybody else had attempted or gone home or summited. So I said, listen, that's the only opportunity I have, because if I go with the team that's going tomorrow, for example, like the middle window that turned up, I know I won't get there. I'm just not feeling strong enough yet. So I waited another while, and over that period, then it started getting into kind of the 20s in May, so May 21st, 22nd, 23rd. And then there was this rumor that there was this late weather window after this cyclone that was coming in, that like we were going to get a run at it. And I started to feel stronger, and I was going on hikes again, acclimatization hikes. Finally started to get a bit of confidence back, and I was like, geez, you know what? You have a chance here. You have a chance. This year was a mess. Like, people had been quarantined, and the groups were all over the place. Like, I was in a group of 6 climbers, and some of them ended up summiting. 1, 2, 3 of them ended up summiting in the first window that came up this year, which was around the 13th, I think. Another one of them ended up summiting in that second window, which was like, none of these windows were ideal, by the way. And there was all sorts of fucking sketchy stories about what was seen up there. And, unfortunately, there was a couple of deaths this year. Another one summited then, I think that was around the 20th maybe. And then there was this rumor that there was this kind of late weather window that was going to be like some sort of fucking nirvanic window that we're going to get like 10-mile-an-hour winds on the summit, and it never even, in hindsight, it never even appeared. Like, so it was
the opposite actually happened. The cyclone.
That's came. What the cyclone came, and then there was all sorts of like a couple of teams chanced their arms. Like, there was some teams that, however they'd done it, they kept themselves basically COVID free. All their team, all their Sherpa. And they were like, we're going to try it later. And then there was all these big snow dumps. The cyclone came in. There was an avalanche that wiped out Camp 3 at one stage, but there was nobody, thankfully, in the tents at Camp 3, and some of them ended up summiting, some even as late as May 31st, I think, and then there's all the politics about, people are talking about, like, what are the icefall doctors going to do? Because they have to, apparently their contract is till May 31st, and they have to whip that stuff off the mountain. It takes them a couple of days. So, people, so like it was all those rumors flying around, and, fucking people whispering in corners, and it was all sorts. And there was, the tensions were running pretty high in our group as well, because people felt there was a lack of leadership from the guy who runs it. And so he got called out one night. He didn't take that very well in front of the group. So, man, it was like, I don't know, it was a bit of like soap opera there for a little while. Like,
so you were ready to make your summit attempt. So my listeners are dying to know, how did it go? Did you make it?
Like I said, felt good. And I had that kind of apprehension that, like, it's game day here, and we were ready to go. My bag was packed. I'd done a walkthrough with one of the guides, and he'd gone through my pack, and I felt good, felt like I was prepared, like this is the best I'm going to get, like, in this period anyway. And the way you go through the Khumbu, you always leave it about 1 or 2 in the morning to give yourself the best chance, because that's when it's most stable, in the depths of the night. So you have an early dinner then. So I was having that kind of dinner around 6 o'clock, just getting the last bit of fuel into me, and finished up around 7. Was heading back to my tent to get a bit of kit before the 1 o'clock kind of leave, and got a tap on the shoulder. We need to talk to you. Can you come down to the other group, the group I mentioned before? I was like, yeah, grand. So we go in there, and they drop the bombshell. They're like, listen, I think it was something like 4 Sherpa have just come down from Camp 2. We tested them. 3 of them have COVID. We've been in touch with Camp 2. We've tested a few people. The cook has COVID. Another Sherpa has COVID, something like that. And like, once you hear the cook has COVID, you're like, man, everybody has COVID, because like everybody hangs out the cook tent. All the Sherpa, they're in there, they're chatting. They help distribute the hot drinks and the food. So I was like, basically the line the company took, the operator was like, listen, we're taking everyone down from camp 2, camp 3, even camp 4. I think they took their camp 4 manager down, which is up at 8,000 meters, you know. We're taking him down, and we're testing everyone. We'll see where we're at with Sherpa. So they dragged everyone down, took whatever, a day and a half, and then tested them. And then they're like, yeah, listen, 90% of our Sherpa have COVID. So that means that we have no, like, they gave it a spiel, like, we're going to try and bring back some of the Sherpa who've summited, or we're going to, you know, contact some of the other providers who've shut down a week ago and see what their Sherpa are doing. We're going to try and, you know, patch together a team of Sherpa to give you guys a chance to go, but they couldn't do that, and I don't know how hard they tried, but yeah. So, you know, without any Sherpa, yeah, you can't, unless you're a professional climber or a very, you know, world-class climber, you're not going for the summit, you know, because the Sherpa do a lot of work. Like, so if your backpack on summit day is 7 kilos, theirs is 21 kilos, you know, at least, if not more, because they're carrying, you're carrying 1, maybe 2 of the oxygen bottles, but more than likely just the one you're using, right? Mm-hmm. And they're carrying another 4 for you and whatever, 2 for them. And then they're changing the regulators. They're watching everything. You know, they're guiding you up there, and they're lifting for you as well. So, like, without them, you're not going. Like, so that was the way it ended. That was around the 24th to 5th of May or something like that. So it was a bit of a, listen, it was, at that point, I didn't have anything more to give. Like, I fought so hard. It'd been such an emotional fucking roller coaster for me. You know, when I heard that, I was like, whatever, man. I don't, you know, I just didn't have anything more emotion to give to it at that point. But, you know, over the next few days, I started to feel the kind of disappointment, the frustration kind of pushing through, and even the kind of little bit of anger around it all, you know, and a lost opportunity. But yeah, that's just the way it rolled for me.
I think your last post, you said it was day 48, and you said, goodbye, Everest. It's been an experience, but I'll be back.
Yeah. I definitely, you know, I do have aspirations to get to the top of the world, and I'd like to give it a good go. I really feel like, apart from the Khumbu, I really feel I missed the mountain, you know, missed the experience. I missed all those famous landmarks like the Lhotse Face, the Bertrand, the Lhotse Face, the Yellow Band, Geneva Spur, you know, South Col, Camp 4, 8,000, getting to 8,000 meters, and then seeing the cone of Everest from that view, which you can only see if you climb to 8,000 meters, you know. And then obviously then the whole, the summit ridge and the Hillary Step and all these famous landmarks. And, you know, I didn't get to experience any of that. So that's a bit of a bugbear, like, but apart from that, I kind of processed it all pretty well. Like, you know, I really gave it a good shot. Like, you know, I really fought hard when I was there, and I really kind of proud, if you want, of the way I acted in the face of all this fucking adversity. It was deeply challenging for me, like, so yeah, and that unexpected challenge, and just to come through that, you know, the way I did, I'm pretty happy with that. So I was able to park it pretty well, and just kind of go, listen, I'll give it another go in a few years or whatever, I can make it happen again.
I mean, the impression I get from you is you really, from any adversity, you're very in tune with your body and your mind, and you take the positives from that to use for other projects or Everest again. You always look at the positive in everything. That's right. Like, I take on these things for numerous reasons, right? But the challenge of it is really important, you know, because it's only in that challenge where you really get to access parts of your character and see them working, and get a kind of clear window on what they are. Like, you just don't get that in everyday life, you know. You got to put yourselves in situations where they're challenging. So I want that challenge. And even though this one was unexpected, and particularly difficult, I can only say great, happy days. You know, I learned so much from that. I came out the other side of it. I learned a lot from it. I'm armed better if it happens again.
And because there's going to be more challenges, and I'm sure that piece is going to come up again, the emotional part of it, but it won't be so unexpected next time. And hopefully it won't take me like weeks to get over to kind of get out the other side of it, but it's, yeah, so I look on it all positively, even, the depths of it all. Like that's where there's great opportunity there, to learn about yourself and learn about your character, and yeah, take huge positives from that.
And how does it compare, or is it comparable to the solo row, like from difficulty or mentally, physically?
Yeah, so the thing about like the solo row as a whole is much more challenging, just because of the relentlessness of it. On Everest, I can go up to the big dome. I think what you talked about earlier looks like a big sitting room. I can get a cup of coffee. Like I can spend 3 days doing nothing, sitting around, and somebody's going to cook me 3 meals a day. On the ocean,
Yeah.
that is a dream. Like, I mean, every day you got to like row for 12 hours straight if you want, at least, sorry, not straight, 12 hours minimum kind of. You got to boil water. You got to watch every fucking wave coming at you. You're constantly wet. It's just relentless. Like, and there's no support, whereas Everest is this kind of big safety net, and, there's people around, and it's comfortable. I'm sleeping on like I said, a 6-inch mattress, and I have internet, and, it's all, it's not comparable really to the row in terms of that. But physically, the thing with mountaineering is there's these like peaks of extreme kind of stress physically because of the lack of altitude, or lack of oxygen and the altitude, and dealing with that. And you never get that in an ocean row. Like the ocean row is just, it's churn, grind, 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 whereas you never get that kind of from that like extreme hyperventilation. You're trying to control your breath, so you go into these like meditative states of like while you're climbing, and when you're in those states, I find anyway, like all sorts of really cool insights and ideas, and your mind goes to places, so and it's it's particularly challenging as well, so you'd never get that on an ocean row.
And all I'm thinking while you're saying that is, so you're planning to do another ocean row, but you decided to just make it harder because now it's the North Atlantic.
That's right. Yeah, that's kind of my MO. I'm not really interested in going over old ground. I'm interested in pushing my limits. So, yeah. So I was thinking about this for a while, and I actually had considered this before as not an alternative, but as another option. Before I picked the 7 summits, I was like, I just come off my solo Atlantic row. And this was one of the options I thought about, but I parked it, and been working on it now though for like 3 years or so. And yeah, it's coming to fruition starting in May this year from New York. Me and a friend of mine are going to row across the North Atlantic, which is a particularly different beast, even though it's only a few thousand miles or a couple of 1,000 miles or so more northerly than the last route. But we're going obviously the opposite direction, so west to east, and we're trying to end up. The goal is to end up in our hometown, Galway, which just will be a phenomenal thing. And I think that was the real centerpiece of this idea for me, is that I can row into my hometown. I think that's just an amazing thing to be able to do after this, crossing an ocean, and no fool of an ocean. Like the North Atlantic is a monster. Like, so we have all sorts of different challenges in terms of that you don't get on that more southern east to west route. So you've got things like you've got the cold, of course, because you're much higher latitudes. You got much more propensity for storms, even hurricanes in that part. There has been hurricanes that time of year in that region of the Atlantic. And then you've got things called these giant eddies, which are these giant whirlpools that, if they're kind of offshoots of the Gulf Stream and the North Atlantic Drift, and if you get caught in them, you can just go around in a circle for sometimes a couple of weeks. Like, if you think you're going forward really fast and all of a sudden you're going backwards really fast because you're in one of these giant eddies, you don't get out of it until you're spat out of it, really. And what else have we got then? We possibly go through the Grand Banks area, which is like very foggy. It's one of the most richly dense fishing in terms of fish population and fishing vessels in the world, so it's particularly kind of dangerous going through there because it's normally dense fog, because you have the Labrador current coming down the south, from the kind of north Canada down to that coastline, and then you have the Gulf Stream going the other way, so you have this which is cold current and warm current, so it creates this foggy area, and then which just happens to be populated with loads of fishing vessels, and then that's where the Perfect Storm, the movie, I suppose, is based on a true story from that area. So it's shallow water as well, which means if you do get storms, you get these giant steep waves, which is very, very dangerous. So yeah, there's plenty of challenges.
Fantastic. And how long will it be? How long? What's the target?
Well, we're going for the world record, which is, would you believe, was set 125 years ago by the first people ever to row an ocean, two Norwegians called Harbo and Samuelson. They got across from New York to the Scilly Isles in the UK in 55 days, 13 hours. So that's the target we've given ourselves. Everything we do in the training and in prep is based around performance and being ready to, at least if we get the conditions, be ready to try and achieve that. Now, that's the big question here, right? So it's all well and good kind of, giving yourself this big target, but like if Mother Nature decides that, this year there's 3 or 4 storms in the North Atlantic, so that you could be Superman, you're not getting across in 55 days, so 2 to 3 months roughly would be the timeline it'll probably take us, but our goal is to be at least endeavor to get under 55 days.
Every time I see you now in social media, you're doing weights, etc. So you do a thing called the pain cave. Do you want to tell people what that is?
Well, so originally it was a kind of a little bit of a kind of, what would you say, a term I put on where we would go and train. So where I would go, and then I used to have a garage gym out the side of, well, firstly, originally I had it back in France when I was playing rugby. I bought some equipment, and over that last 5 or 6 years, I've been adding to the equipment all the time, slowly. And I always had like a kind of, I wanted to have a bit of a facility that I could train at home as well as going to a gym. And that's kind of just turned into a kind of good home gym now. And then my brother used to come out and he used to say, well, we're going to the pain cave today, because the sessions used to be pretty, although we used to do a lot of rowing sessions together, and they're like particularly manky, so yeah, that's where it kind of originated from. And then it was all at the same time, it's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek, like nobody was really taking that seriously, and then so it's kind of come from there. And then I set up a platform, a new platform for myself, where I was like, I'm trying to commercialize what I do, and I started a kind of there's different parts of the platform. So there's coaching, there's online courses, there's events, really exciting stuff that I've coming up in terms of big trips where people can join me, like to climb a mountain or run across the desert or whatever. But one of the parts I had was a membership site, so on a site called Patreon, and I transferred that over and all the people in that to this new site, which I call the Damian Browne method. I know, particularly egotistical, but I just couldn't think of anything else. And on that, so I called the membership site on it, the Pain Cave. So that's and I share basically a lot of learnings from my training, because that's where a lot of my stuff has come from, just going into those windows, really difficult physical and mental windows, and learning through that. And that's something I love to do. I've been doing it for 24 years. So I see myself as somebody who knows particularly mount about that. I've spent many hours baking in or with lactic acid coursing through my body. So plenty of pain gone through it. And I try and teach people, how to all sorts around that.
Exactly. And it's not just the physical, because the thing that I always get from you, and particularly during the Everest, it was, you're very aware of your emotions and feelings and positivity, the mental side. So that's what people will get from this as well.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, huge emphasis on that. Like that's the game changer, right? Now, so I talk about training your psychology through your physiology. So the vehicle we use is the body, like, and we go through that, and we do that for a reason. It's because the nervous system it's connected. It's brain, it's spinal cord, and it's your nervous system, or sorry, your nerve endings and all your neurons, right? So we, like, when we elicit certain sensations through our nervous system, the electrical signals all just light up in our minds. So there's so much to be learned through that way of training about the mind and how it works. So yeah, I've like, that's a hugely passionate area of mine, and something I'm very kind of interested in sharing, advocating, and promoting. So I've got my own methods that I've, over the last 20 odd years, that I've come up with that are all based around the mind, and that's what I teach on the in the pain cave and on my site. It's called the Four Controllables method, body first method, and they're unique to me because they're things that I've learned through necessity, like trying to deal with my mind while fucking suffering from altitude sickness on Kilimanjaro, or spending 40 odd days rowing without steering on the Atlantic while there's fucking sea sores gnawing away at your fucking resolve every day. You spend enough time in these areas, you learn how to cope with your mind, and I've done a hell of a lot of kind of physical and mental training, and now I've packaged it. Really, honestly, genuinely proud of the kind of the value, the detail, and the method, and the value in it, and what I've kind of poured into it myself. And yeah, I think it's great. It's just, I feel this is like a bit of a undiscovered frontier in terms of training your mind through your body, and I think it's the next step in, like, kind of peak performance that people are going to discover in the next 10, 15 years. And it's just so powerful, like, because if you push yourself into these windows, these physically difficult windows where you're at the edges of your capacity, and your mind, and you learn to deal with your mind there, man, anything that comes at you in everyday life is a breeze. Like, you just so used to, you've exposed yourself to your most vulnerable, your weakest, your most doubtful that morning in the gym or whatever, and then you have a little bit of a stressful thing that day, you're like, grand, you just deal with it like nothing is a bother, So there's real power behind it. It's a very empowering thing to learn through, and I think it's really going to come into the kind of the lexicon of high performance in the next, whatever, 10, 15 years. It's amazing. The mind is just, it kind of blows my mind, if you want, that, like, this, we spend from the day we're born to the day we die, we have consciousness, right? And we spend every moment of our lives, but we're never taught anything about dealing with it. Nobody ever tells us how to manage it. And it's the thing that is present in every moment of our lives. So, the sooner some sort of education, like, I mean, it surely merits some sort of education, like, as a young age, particularly now when we see in these times so many people having, mental health issues, like, exactly. So, so I'm very fascinated by it and interested in it. I think the method I've developed, although it's come from kind of a totally different field, is very applicable to teaching people more about their mind and dealing with it.
So I've been following you since the rowing days across the Atlantic. So I'm looking forward to this summer following your row, and hopefully I'll be there in Galway when the boat comes in with a big crowd celebrating.
Yeah, that'd be great. It's great to see you there. And that's the kind of vision, right? With this, like, is just we really want to share it in terms of build that story and build interest in it. And, you know, these two local guys who are trying to achieve something extraordinary, create history. We'll be the first Irish team to ever do it, row the North Atlantic. And get, you know, we're coming into our hometown, so hopefully we can get like the prom and the docks when we eventually, the docks in Galway eventually land, just, you know, full of people waiting to welcome us in, and hopefully they'll have taken something from our suffering.
Thanks a million. So I need to let you go back to the gym to get training again. It's only a few months away.
That's all. Yeah, no, there'll be plenty of that. But yeah, no, thanks very much. Great to be on again.
Thanks again, Damian, there for another great interview. You can also check about him talking about his original Atlantic rowing on our very first podcast, episode 1 with Damian. And I really look forward to continuing following his adventures. And you can all follow his adventures as well on his Instagram is owlstock, which is AULD_stock, or Project Empire on Facebook, or the website to follow that North American Atlantic row as well. I really look forward to following that adventure. I would ask if you could please subscribe to Apple Podcast so a new episode will appear in your library every week. I would also really appreciate if you could leave a rating and a review, as it helps others to discover this podcast. To find out who's on every Tuesday, please follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Travel Tales with Fergal. Stay safe and keep dreaming of future travels.
Travel Tales with Fergal.